Hello, good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the 261st episode of the Ask Abhijit show. I hope everybody is doing great. And let us see who all is there on the live chat with us today. I can see Shiva Sai, Yashwant Sudhir, Adarsh Rajput, Vaibhav Dangra, Sumit Agarwal, Priyanshi Sood, Jimmy, Geopolitical Dubey from Indore, I think. Vaibhav Dangra is from Tokyo in Japan. Devik Shriyan Gojo. Vinay S. Man, Satish Kumar Sharma, Truthful Penguin, Pratham Sharma, Slayer, Arnab, Mahita Busetti, Shivastai, Shri Ramachandraya Namaha, Animesh Paul, Sumit Agarwal, Vinay S. Man again, Gojo, Shubh Agarwal, Sam the Gamer, Slayer again, Anuradha, Vinyas, Geopolitical Dubey from Indore again, Sarang Ninale, Sentin SP Satish Kumar Sharma, Ganapati Raja Akash Kumar, Sumit Agarwal, Rohan Suneja, Sumit Agarwal again, Pranay Paul from Kolkata, Manisha Cardozo. Who else do we have? Shubhankar Kulkarni, Swapnesh Gawas, Pritam, Jimmy, Mandar Hadkar, Ayush Singh, Ashish Udash, Vinyas again, Sumit Agarwal, Ichinose Senpai, Subhajit Ghosh, Aditya Jaiswal, Sarang Ninale, Sudarshan Raghavan, Ankit Mohapatra, Chaitanya, Rashmi Rathore from Rajasthan, Brijesh, Shrijan Das, Pratham Sharma, Sudindra Desai, Abhijit Rao, Akhila Narayan, SKK, Pritam Kumar Raut, Meet Mistry, Ashish Pandel, and many other people. Advay Pillai, SHXXR11, Arpan, Sam the Gamer, Keshav, and so many other people. Random Skull again, hello. Tushar Kalburgi, Anonymous Scientist is back. Xenomorphosis, McLevin is here. Ankita is here. Mukund, and so many other people. So thank you so much for being here on the live chat. And let's take some questions. What questions do we have today? Let's take this one first. Sam the Gamer says, can somebody... Okay, here I am. I found it. I saw it, so I'll take it. The Wakhan Corridor of Afghanistan. How is it important for India? What's the Wakhan Corridor? Why is it important? How is it important? We'll have to go and take a look at the map. I'll have to crack out the map. It's not open yet. Let me open it. Let me deploy it. Let's deploy the map and take a look at the Wakhan Corridor. Now, what is the deal with the Wakhan Corridor? Okay. Where's the map? We start today's session with the map. So here is the geography of the subcontinent, and we are talking about the Wakhan Corridor, which means that we have to go to northern India and beyond the present-day boundaries of northern India. So the Wakhan Corridor is this strip of land that belongs to Afghanistan, which is sandwiched between Pakistan-occupied Gilgit-Baltistan, Jammu and Kashmir, and Tajikistan, and some part of it is also connected to Xinjiang, Chinese-occupied Xinjiang. That is the Wakhan Corridor. Now, in the future, when India regains the territory that's currently temporarily occupied by Pakistan, which is Gilgit-Baltistan, POJK, Gilgit-Baltistan, etc., then we will have this connection with Afghanistan via the Wakhan Corridor, the Wakhan National Park. Now, this is a very mountainous region. If you look at the satellite image, you can see it's all mountainous, mountains all over the place. It's fully frozen, as you can see, right? It's a very mountainous region. It's very hard to traverse, and that's the deal. So the importance of the Wakhan Corridor is that when we once again have our connectivity with Afghanistan, this part of Afghanistan will be our essentially our corridor or our gateway to Central Asia. That is the importance of the Wakhan Corridor, which is pretty evident from the map. So that is your answer, sir. Now let's take some of the super chats. I can see Shubhankar has a question. I fail to understand why the current regime in Iran has problems with Israel from the start. The prime enemy was always Saudi Arabia. Why pick a fight with Israel? Iran fights while Saudi prospers. Well, I could give you another 90-minute explanation, or you can just watch or you can just watch the episode that just streamed live like 5 minutes ago, which is Geostrategy episode 7. In which I have gone deep into these matters. I've done a very deep dive into what is the deal between Israel and Iran. They used to have cooperation. They were allies of sorts during the regime of the Iranian dictator, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Then there was the Iranian Revolution, 1979, where they became enemies. And the Iranian regime saw Israel as an illegitimate state, and the small shaitan, the shaitan Abuzur, was the US, and so on. Then there was the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, in which the two nations, Iran and Israel, were officially enemies, publicly enemies, but privately and secretly they were allies, and Israel was supporting arms and ammunition to Iran to ensure that Iran is not defeated by Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And then once the war was over, they again became full-scale enemies, and Iran started developing a nuclear program, and Israel sees that as an existential threat. They say that they should be the only nuclear power in the region, and Iran should not have nuclear weapons, and so on. So it's a long story. If you want to get to the bottom of that, please watch episode 7 of Geostrategy that will be available on the channel now. Ganapati, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your contribution. Rohan Suneja says, His Majesty Karan Thapar says Operation Sindoor was a blunder. Well, I don't take Mr. Karan Thapar seriously, so there's no point discussing his opinions. Ananda Kishore says, was Ambedkar on the team Gandhi or team India? Look, once again, let me reiterate, I have not studied the life and career of Dr. Ambedkar, so I don't know which team he was on. Dheeraj Kamath says, I was born in Bahrain. I have lived in Bahrain, where my family still lives. The US Fifth Fleet just left Bahrain, leaving Bahrain vulnerable to Iran. What are there reasons to worry? Let's take a look at the map, okay, so that everybody understands what we're talking about. Where is Bahrain? Small little nation, but important nation. Very small nation, but important nation. This here is Bahrain. See this tiny little nation here? Even smaller than Qatar. So, the US Fifth Fleet apparently has just left Bahrain. I'm not aware of that, but obviously, since you are from there, you will know what is happening. Does it mean that if the US Fifth Fleet leaves Bahrain, does it mean that Bahrain is now vulnerable to Iran? So, we are assuming here that Iran is a crazy nation that wants to destroy everybody, and Iran is a big threat to everybody in the region. I don't think that's the case. Iran, in my opinion, just wants to be left alone. And let us do their message to the world is that allow us to do whatever we want. We are a sovereign nation. You don't get to tell us whether we can have nukes or not, or what kind of military capabilities we can have. We are a sovereign nation. We'll develop whatever is best for our interests. And maybe it is possible, like some claim, that Iran has imperialistic ambitions of its own. Well, many nations have that, right? But does it mean that if the US Fifth Fleet leaves Bahrain, then Iran is now guaranteed to smash Bahrain to bits? I don't think so. Bahrain is a very important nation and a very important ally of the US. And if Iran, for no reason, attacks Bahrain, well, it will invite significant trouble on itself. So I would say that this event of the US Fifth Fleet just leaving Bahrain for whatever deployment, it is not necessarily a reason to worry. What could be a reason to worry? A significant further escalation in the conflict. Maybe more Israeli strikes on Iran, or maybe if the US gets involved in the war and tries to do a decapitation strike on Iran, or if it tries to destroy the Iranian nuclear facilities, like Fordo, for example, if such things happen, then there could be a reason to worry all across the West Asia region, all across the Gulf region. It would mean that Iran may hit all US military bases in the region and potentially US allied nations as well. That would be a reason to worry. So I don't think Iran is going to do something crazy unless something crazy is done to it. Okay, WRV 1313 says, why has Trump changed his stance on Pakistan? Well, I would recommend that you watch my episode 5 of Geostrategy, in which I have gone into exhaustive detail as to what Trump's dealings with Pakistan are. Where is that? Let me put that on the screen. 1 second. Give me a second. Okay, it's Geostrategy episode 5. Give me a second. I'll put that on the screen. Watch that. You will know exactly what the deal is. I've gone into incredible detail in that. Nobody else has done the analysis. It is this episode here. Geostrategy episode 5, in which I've spoken about the Ahmedabad air crash and also about the Trump-Pakistan connection. So if you want to understand why Trump is suddenly in love with Pakistan, well, then please watch that episode. I will not repeat all of that over here again because it will be counterproductive. It will be redundant. Watch the episode. I have answered your question in great detail in that episode. Tejas says, is Urdu considered an official Indian language? If yes, in which state? I see hatred towards Urdu in many parts of India. How should we Indians look at Urdu? I have no idea if Urdu is considered to be an official Indian language. I've seen signboards in some parts of India, in certain very major cities. I've seen signboards in Urdu, which kind of indicates that it seems to be regarded as one of the official Indian languages. I am not sure which state. Okay, and well, hatred towards Urdu or whatever, that's a whole different story. Look, you have to understand what Urdu is. Urdu is a mongrel language. It's an amalgamation of multiple languages. And this language, Urdu, what is the meaning of this word Urdu? The word Urdu or Urdu means camp in the Turkic Chagatai language, which is also a word in the Mongolian language, because the Turkic languages are related genetically to the Mongolian languages. So it means a military camp. So this language Urdu, it emerged, it evolved in Turkic military camps in India. These military camps were part of the infrastructure of occupation of India. And in these military camps, you had people of various with various languages who had to communicate with each other. So you would have some Indian vassals who would speak various Prakrit based Upper languages, which were derived from Sanskrit. Then you would have Turkic speakers who would speak Turkic languages like Chagatai. Then you would have Persian speakers who would speak Persian, and you would have people who would speak Arabic. So all these languages amalgamated, and a new hybrid mongrel language evolved, which was based on Sanskrit grammar, a lot of Sanskrit vocabulary, but also lots of loan words came in from the Turkic languages, from the Persian language, from the Arabic language, and that gave rise to this language called Urdu. So it's an Indian language, sure, it evolved in India, but it has a lot of foreign influence and foreign loan words, and it's not what you would call a purely Indian language. Some could argue that way, right? So maybe that's the reason why some people have a hatred towards it. I personally have no great love for Urdu, right? I don't have any hatred for Urdu, but I don't have any great love for Urdu, and so on. Okay. Book Rev says, Namaste, first of all. What roles are Russia and China playing in the Iran-Israel conflict? How might their involvement shift regional dynamics? So I've gone into that also, this question, in the episode 7 of Geostrategy that just concluded. It's there on the channel, you can look into it. But the deal is this. Look, I'll obviously answer your question. So both nations are allies, you could say, official, unofficial, whatever, but they're allies of Iran. What's the relationship between Russia and Iran? First of all, Iran is has been supplying Russia with drones, kamikaze drones, Shahed drones, for use in the Ukraine conflict. That's been going on for at least 2-3 years. And so that's a great help that Iran is providing to Russia. Russia is also providing various kinds of military and other assistance to Iran. It is supposed to be in the process of selling one of the variants of the Sukhoi fighter plane to Iran. So that is an ongoing situation. So there is this close relationship that Russia has with Iran. And then there's China. So China and Iran have signed a few years ago a strategic deal, a 25-year strategic agreement, in which China will invest, I don't know, maybe $500 billion or something worth of money into Iranian infrastructure and industries. And Iran, as part of the agreement, will sell to China tremendous quantities of energy, which is fossil fuels, mainly oil and gas, mainly oil, at reasonably discounted rates. So Iran is very important for China. A significant amount of cheap energy China will get from Iran. And if Iran suddenly becomes a US vassal, then it will be a big setback, not just for Russia, but also for China. So it is in Russia's interest, it is in China's interest for the Iranian government to continue to exist and for a regime change to not happen in Tehran. So they will play various kinds of roles in this matter. Russia will probably want to mediate between the US and Iran, and reach some and ensure that some kind of agreement is reached between the two nations. Mr. Putin could offer his good offices in this regard to Mr. Trump and to the Iranian leadership. And so from Mr. Putin's perspective, he would want some kind of agreement to be done, to be signed, some kind of deal to be signed between Iran and the US, which may kind of cap Iran's ability to pursue its nuclear program and so on. But it will at least ensure that a regime change doesn't happen. So both Russia and China are deeply invested in Iran, and they both would not want a regime change to happen or a destruction of the Iranian military capabilities to happen. The way it says, what impact did Ronald Reagan have as president? He was one of probably the last great US president. He was obviously a Republican. He was a conservative, and he probably was the guy who presided over the slow disintegration of the USSR. And his economic policies were good. He launched a war on drugs in Central and South America, Operation Condor. I don't think anybody remembers that today. So he had a pretty big impact as a US president. He was president for 2 terms. And in my opinion, he's the last great US president. After that, we've not had a great US president. Nachiket says, won't Israel have a major fuel deficit if war breaks out? No, they won't. They have a good understanding with various Arab nations. The Arab nations also see Israel as a threat, or see Iran as a threat. So Israel has a good understanding with various Arab nations like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Qatar, etc. And they will get fuel from these nations. Of course, if a war breaks out, if there's a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, if there's instability, then there's going to be a fuel crisis globally, not just for Israel. But Israel is in the region, so it'll be actually easier for Israel to get fuel. It'll be more difficult for the rest of the world to get continuing supplies of fossil fuels, mainly oil, from the Gulf region. Your average tech enthusiast says, if the US had stayed in the JCPOA, would Iran have delayed its nuclear program? Well, according to the terms and conditions of the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Iran was supposed to cap its nuclear program, and the details you can look up. But yes, if the US had stayed, if the US had not walked out of the JCPOA, then what would have happened is that there would have been sanctions relief for Iran. So some of the sanctions would have been undone. And in exchange for that, Iran would have capped its nuclear program. It would have allowed IAEA inspectors to oversee its nuclear activities, its nuclear program, and they would have agreed to not enrich uranium beyond a certain limit. Maybe it's 60%, maybe it's some other, I don't remember what it was, but there was a cap. So then Iran would have delayed its nuclear program for sure, 100%, if the US had stayed in the JCPOA. But the US said that we have received intelligence that Iran is going ahead with something or the other, and that's why this deal is no longer valid. And Mr. Trump walked out unilaterally of the JCPOA, which then has given Iran the excuse or the go-ahead, the green signal, that if the guy I signed the deal with has walked out, then I can do whatever I want. So that's how it works. VS says, what's the most authentic or accurate book on the JFK assassination? I have not read any books on the JFK assassination. I would imagine if you want to know more about it, you would want to read Oliver Stone has written a book about this. He's a filmmaker, of course. He's also made 2 movies about this. One is a movie that stars Kevin Costner. It's called JFK. And then more recently, he has come up with an updated documentary about the JFK assassination. And I'm sure, I believe Oliver Stone has also written a book to accompany the documentary. So maybe that is a good place to look into. I personally have not read any entire book on the matter, so I can't recall properly. But I would say look into the documentary by Oliver Stone. You can watch the movie also, and there's a book that accompanies the second, more recent documentary. So maybe that will be a good place to get authentic and accurate information. Of course, there are lots of people who will say that it's conspiracy theories. There are lots of people who will say that what the Warren Commission says is the right thing, but clearly the Warren Commission is wrong. The Warren Commission said that there was a single shooter who shot the president from the back, from behind. If you watch the Zapruder film, you can see it's clearly somebody from the front who has shot JFK. You can see his head recoil backwards while his head explodes. So come on. Okay. Ayers Manticore says, what could dark matter be useful for if found out? We have no idea. See, dark matter right now, it's a complete mystery. It is clearly some kind of particle or family of particles or something that interacts only gravitationally, most likely, cold dark matter. And if it interacts only gravitationally, and if it's so small that there's nothing we can do about it to use it with the current state of our technology. We are an electromagnetic species. The world we live in is an electromagnetic world. Without electromagnetism, we see nothing, we sense nothing. And gravity is something we perceive only very weakly. So even if we discover what dark matter actually is, I don't think we'll be able to utilize it in any way whatsoever, scientifically, industrially, commercially, whatever, for a few centuries. In the long run, I don't know. Maybe if dark matter is something that can be annihilated to produce energy, maybe that could be a fuel source long down the road. So maybe the dark matter could annihilate. For example, if dark matter is made up of primordial black holes, quantum bound states of primordial black holes, then maybe you could somehow induce it to annihilate, which would give you Hawking radiation, which is a tremendous source of energy potentially. So maybe down the line, a few centuries down the line, we could potentially use it if that turns out to be the case. Feminist Slayer, etc. says, why didn't Russia colonize Americas like the European powers? Well, Russia, if you look at its geographical location, it's a Eurasian power. Now let's go to the map. The map will give us the answer. See, if you look at the map, yes, we can see today Russia is just gigantic nation, but historically Russia has been this region around Moscow and Kiev. The Kiev region, Kiev was the original capital of the Rus people, the Kievan Rus. And then later, after the Mongolian yoke was thrown off, Muscovy became a big deal and Moscow became the capital. So this region was essentially the homeland of the Slavic, the Rus people. Ukraine was the borderlands, and Moscow and its principalities, surrounding principalities, St. Petersburg, etc., Sankt Petersburg, etc., were the major cities. And that's where Russia was. So it was a Eurasian, land-based power. It had access to the oceans, but to the sea, but all frozen. The North Sea, the Barents Sea, and so on. Then later, Russia expanded eastwards. It was able to go all the way to the Far East, and it eventually took possession of Alaska, which it eventually later sold to the US. So because Russia had so much territory that it had conquered and expanded into, and because it was not a seafaring power, it was just a land-based power. That's why it did not colonize the Americas like the other European powers, which are all maritime powers, like the UK, which is an island, like Spain, which is a peninsula that is out there in the Atlantic Ocean, essentially, and the Mediterranean. And the Portuguese, once again, a maritime nation. And of course, the Danes, etc., they also historically were a maritime power. Belgium later became a deal, but in Africa and so on. So because of Russia's geographical position, location, that's why, because of that, geography is of course one of the decisive factors in geopolitics and in history. And that's why Russia did not proceed to colonize the Americas the way the other European maritime powers did. Amisha Mishra says, what price did Mr. Asim Munir of Pakistan pay for his free lunch with Trump? It was not a free lunch, I assure you. And that's why you're asking me about the price. Well, once again, I would say, if you want the answer to your question, a detailed answer to your question, I would highly recommend you watch episode 5 of Geostrategy, in which I have gone into the Trump-Pakistan connection. Okay? So Trump is hoping to grab a piece of the Pakistan pie. His family, his business empire is investing in Pakistan's cryptocurrency scene, the stable coin scene, etc. They are going to make investments in Pakistan's oil and gas sector. They want to tap into Pakistan's rare earth sectors and all that. And all of that is going to be, that access is going to be given exclusively, essentially, it looks like, to the Trump empire, business empire. So that's the price Mr. Munir has paid. And the military is very much involved in this, the Pakistani military. That's why there is this great love that Trump has developed for Pakistan. Because the total value of all of this is around, I would say, 65. Is it billions or is it trillion? It's about 65 trillion overall, the assets. How much can be extracted remains to be seen. But that's the deal. So that's the price you pay for a lunch with Trump if you're the Pakistani dictator. The price is you sell your country. You sell your country's resources. Please, Indians, my dear Indian viewers, see it this way. Pakistan is our ancestral territory that is currently temporarily occupied by terrorists. It's our ancestral lands, Pakistan. It's for thousands of years, it's been part of our ancestral heritage, right? Our lands. And those resources are our resources that are temporarily occupied by terrorists. And who is now going to plunder them? The Trump empire. That's the price Munir has paid. He's sold off his country to get a lunch with Trump. MK says, is India trying to have its own ASML like China? Well, eventually, look, ASML is not a Chinese entity. ASML is Dutch. ASML. Let's Google ASML, shall we? Quickly. Let us go to our friend Google. These days, I think people do chat GPT, right? I still do Google. I'm old-fashioned. What is ASML? So ASML is a Dutch multinational company that designs, develops, manufactures, etc. semiconductor equipment. Okay, so ASML is Dutch, and the major thing they make is those photolithography machines that make that etch, do the etchings and create the architecture on silicon that is the basis of the chips, the microprocessors, the chips, the GPUs, and so on. So without those photolithography machines, you will not have those incredibly complicated and powerful chips, GPUs, etc. Right? So it's a very important technology to have, and this technology has been developed over decades and decades by this company. And I think it has a more than 90% global share, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but very significant global share ASML has. So for India to become a major semiconductor player, a major semiconductor manufacturer, exporter, etc., and to be completely self-sufficient in semiconductors, we will have to develop our own technology similar to what ASML has. And that is obviously the great goal. Now, how long it takes remains to be seen. We want to become a major player by the 2030s. By 2030, essentially the next 5-10 years maximum. So we'll have to do a lot of growing up, essentially. We'll have to develop very, very difficult technologies in this time period. But yes, we would like to do that. And that is the mission we have given ourselves. That's the mission that the government has given to India and to itself. Okay, Suranjan Kumar Biswas says, what are your thoughts on Pakistan's Maulana Tariq Jamil claiming he's a descendant of Prithviraj Chauhan through his son Ramdev Chauhan? Look, I'm not aware of this claim by whatever Maulana or whatever. It's possible that this Maulana may have Chauhan ancestry. There are lots of Pakistanis who have Rajput ancestry. But the moment you change your religion and you start hating your ancestral land and culture, I would say you are no longer Rajput. What is the prime characteristic of a Rajput? You love your dharma and you love your culture, civilization, and you love your motherland. And you fight and die for it if required. These Pakistanis who claim to be Rajputs, they want to destroy India. They hate India. They hate their own ancestral culture. How can they then claim we are descendants of Prithviraj Chauhan? Even if they are, who cares? You have betrayed your ancestor, your great ancestor, by being who you are today. So I don't know. I don't care about the veracity or not of this claim. It is just maybe it's something this gentleman, this individual is doing to position himself highly and to create some kind of a buzz for himself and some kind of name for himself, to claim ancestry from a great man, that sort of thing. I don't even know if Prithviraj Chauhan had a son called Ramdev Chauhan. So maybe this is all fabricated. Even if it's true, I don't care, because once you convert to a foreign religion, it's fine if you want to, but once you do that, you're no longer a Rajput. Once you hate your own ancestral culture, once you hate your own ancestors, you hate your own motherland, you are no longer a Rajput. Come on. So I don't care. Haran says genealogists confirm that Proto-Turkic people had mixed Mongoloid and Caucasian ancestry. Western Gokturks had nearly European, 100% European Uralic ancestry even before migrating to Anatolia, showing deep roots in Eurasian genetics. Well, I'll tell you, the actual Proto-Turk. Okay, I'm sure this is done. Okay, I have not looked it up, but I'm sure you must have done your own due diligence and you must have found this. That's why you're telling me. So, noted, first of all, noted what you're saying. Secondly, the real Proto-Turks were the Xiongnu people. Let's Google it. Okay, who are the Xiongnu people? It's a very strange spelling that we have. Okay, but let's go here. The Xiongnu people. These were a nomadic confederation. They were essentially the cousins of the ancestors of today's Mongols. Okay, and if we look at where these people had an empire, they essentially had an empire where the Mongols exist today. So the Xiongnu and the Mongols were essentially the same people. If you go back maybe 2,500 years or so. So if we go back to Indian history, how did things work? You had, first of all, Indo-Greek kingdoms in the northwest, in the Gandhar region, right? Indo-Greek kingdoms. You had great dharmic kings like Milinda, etc., Menander, and so on. And eventually the Indo-Greeks just assimilated into the Indian population. Then what happened after the Indo-Greeks is that the Scythians invaded, the Shakas invaded India, northern India, started from Gandhar, and then eventually they settled down in western and conquered and settled in western northern India and so on and so forth. The great Mahakshatrapas. The Scythians were the same people as us, genetically. But why did the Scythians invade? Because they were being pressurized by the Kushans. So why were the Kushans pressurizing the Scythians in their territory? Because the Kushans were being pressurized by the Huns, the Xiongnu, the people who originated in present-day Mongolia. So those are the actual Proto-Turk people. And I promise you, they would not have any Mongoloid Caucasian ancestry. That's about 2,500 years before today. If you go back to the so-called Proto-Turks from 1,800 years ago, they may have mixed Caucasian ancestry. If you look at the Proto-Turks from 1,500 years ago, they may have definitely Caucasian ancestry mixed with Mongoloid ancestry. But the original Xiongnu from 2,500 years ago, they were purely Mongolic Turkic. No Caucasoid ancestry that I can think of. And the Kushans, of course, had what today they would call Caucasoid ancestry. If you look at the Tarim Basin River mummies, you will see that many of them have red hair or blonde hair, and they seem to have light skin. But if you look at the gods they worshipped and the language they spoke, there's nothing Caucasian or European about that. It's very Dharmic and so on. So history is super complicated. Super complicated. But interesting fact that you brought out over here. So thank you for that. Harshay says, what's a honey trap? And when was it started? How does it work in other different countries? Was it used in ancient India? Honey trap is Vish Kanyas. You know, Chanakya, Vishnugupta Chanakya had this practice. You want to trap officials from enemy nations or enemy territories. You honey trap them using Vish Kanyas. Vish Kanyas would sometimes poison the guy or sometimes entrap the guy in a love affair. And that's how, by entrapping the guy and fascinating the guy and seducing the guy, the official, high-ranking official, you can get all the state secrets. That's a honey trap. As simple as that. What's a honey trap? It's compromising a high-ranking or important person by having them engage in a romantic or sexual affair with one of your agents who is pretending to be a normal person, usually a female. That's a honey trap. Okay, that's the term they use. It's I suppose it's always been around. You read about read the Arthashastra, you will find that in there, right? The Arthashastra was written 2,500 years ago, roughly. And I suppose every country has its way of doing things. The Chinese use this technique against Americans, as of now, and so on. So yeah, that's the deal. UC says, can you tell us what the CIA is? The Central Investigative Agency, the CIA, is one of the three-letter agencies that I know of, that I can think of off the top of my head. The other is the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI is the domestic intelligence agency within the US, within the territorial boundaries of the United States. And the CIA is the foreign intelligence wing that does spying activities, destabilizing activities, regime change operations, quasi-terroristic activities, drug operations, all the nastiest things you can think of in the world. The CIA does that. So as the United States has this foreign intelligence and destabilization wing, which is the CIA. And they have the CIA field manual, and some of these things have been declassified. If you read them, they're pretty nasty stuff. But if you're a nasty person, you'll learn something from those things. And they are the ones who taught the Afghan Mujahideen how to use terrorism as a strategy. Of course, for liberating Afghanistan from the Soviets, but then that was then repurposed into the Kashmir terrorism. And they also had similar practices in South America, Central America, and so on. I mean, why is there so much drug cultivation in these regions? Well, there has to be a reason for that. The first question you ask yourself is, who's consuming all the drugs? Okay, Aries Manticore says, is it possible due to the Green Revolution, dals, legumes were selectively grown to contain more carbs instead of proteins? Should we try to create superior GMO variants to reduce carb and increase proteins? I don't think the Green Revolution had the objective of increasing the carb content of legumes, dals, etc. The Green Revolution the objective was to create sufficient crops for Indians by focusing on just a few crops. So India has always had this tremendous biodiversity. All kinds of different crops existed. Crops that are almost unknown today. Very few people eat them. These days, it's again becoming slightly more popular. Crops like bajra, jawar, etc. Various kinds of mazes we had in India, and so on and so forth. Today, it's just 2-3 kinds of rice and 2-3 kinds of wheat. In wheat also, we had so much diversity, but only a few strains of wheat are now prevalent in India. So a lot of the biodiversity was wiped out because of the Green Revolution. So it did solve the problem that India had of being a tremendously impoverished and undernourished nation. It solved that problem, but at the cost of India's biodiversity. It could have been done better, for sure. No question about it. But it did not have the effect of selectively growing legumes in such a way that there's more carb content and less protein content. That's not the case. I don't think that's the case. Should we try and create superior GMO variants to reduce carb and increase protein? I think it's never a good idea to try and fiddle with the genetic makeup of organisms in an artificial way, because you may introduce certain issues that will be apparent only 20-30 generations down the line. By that time, there's nothing much you can do about it. Because see, if you tweak some genes, it's going to have an effect on the other genes in some way or the other that we don't understand. There is something called the dark matter of DNA. So if you look at our genome, human genome, pretty complicated genome, right? We only understand 3-4% of it. About 95-96% of our genome, we don't understand it at all. It seems to be non-coding. It seems to be bits and pieces of DNA code that don't code for any proteins or anything. They don't seem to have any purpose, but it's still there in our genome, and it's being passed on generation after generation. So maybe it has some use, and if you mess with that, it may end up doing something terrible to you down the line, 20-30 generations down the line, potentially. So the point is, it is very tempting to play God when you have the tools, but you have the tools and you're tweaking stuff, but we don't understand really what the long-term effects of that are going to be. So I think it's not a good idea, in my opinion, to try and create superior GMO variants without fully understanding the genome and what it does. Okay, Arun says, does Turkey still deserve to be called the drone superpower after the failure of Baykar in the 3-day war? Look, all of this is just much of this is propaganda and narratives. Okay. A nation that produces lots of drones, but none of them have been tested in warfare, you can't call that nation a drone superpower. And then when the drones are actually tested in warfare, we know what ended up happening in the 3-day war between Pakistan and India. We destroyed all their drones. The drones were completely ineffective. I'm not sure what all drones were used, Was the Kizil Elma used? Was the Baykar used? Were other drones used? But whatever drones were used, many of them were Turkish. Those were all wiped out by India. So I think that has caused a significant dent to Turkey's so-called reputation of being a drone power. And I don't think Turkey really deserves to be called a drone superpower or whatever. Of course, they have certain drones that seem to be very high-end, stealth with stealth characteristics, like the Kizil Elma drone, the Red Apple, and so on. But I'm not sure if that has been battle-proven anywhere. So any system, you can tout it and praise it to the high heavens, but the only real test is its performance in battle. So that still remains to be seen. So thus far, I would say Turkey doesn't deserve that sort of title of being a drone superpower. Naman Singh says the history of the US says that we can't rely on the US. We are heavily dependent on the US. We should make our own technological ecosystem, like our own messaging application, social media, because the US can choke us if they decide to do so by banning. Well, I agree with you, Naman Singh. You are absolutely right. I myself have been saying this for quite some time. I have been doing these shows for about 4 years now, and I've been saying this from the beginning, that we cannot have these dependencies that could one day come to bite us in our backside, right? For example, India, I think we have a substantial amount of the I'm just giving a different example here, but our territory, our land is home to about at least 10 to 20% of the world's rare earth minerals. But we don't have the industry to extract them. We don't know how to extract them. That's why we are dependent on China and others. And now China has put export restrictions on rare earth metals and rare earth magnets. And because of that, we are in a significant amount of crisis right now. We have reserves only until the mid of June. We have been forced to stop exporting rare earths to Japan, even though we have an agreement with Japan. So when you have the raw materials and resources, but if you don't develop them, then you're going to end up dependent on your enemies. And to develop the industries and the know-how and the capabilities and technologies to extract and process the raw earths in India and in a usable way, it's going to take us a decade at least, if we start now. A decade. That's how stupid we have been. When it comes to other technologies, only when something bad happens, that's when we wake up. So once again, when it comes to social media, if in the future the US decides to cut off India from social media, then we will suddenly find ourselves in a position where we can't communicate with each other as a nation, as a society. So you are right. We need to have our own technological ecosystem. The Chinese have their own complete stack. They don't need the US. They've banned US apps. They've banned US platforms from China. The Russians have their own things. They have Yandex is a search engine, and they have something else for social media and all. So Russia and China have made sure that they are not dependent on the US. We have done nothing of the sort, which is very short-sighted and very disappointing. So I agree with you. It needs to be done. Paras Virdi says, why is Iran so against Israel? Yeah, well, look, long story. If you want to understand properly, watch episode 7 of Geostrategy that concluded 45 minutes ago. I explained in great detail why the current situation exists. There was a time when Iran and Israel were allies during the dictatorship of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, who was a US asset, a Western asset, who was selling his country's oil reserves to the West at deeply discounted rates. And then Mohammad Mossadegh, the prime minister, took over and he nationalized Iran's oil industry, which is why Operation Ajax happened and the Americans got rid of him. And then the Shah comes back as a dictator. And then there's the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution, and they are pro-Palestine. So the new regime was pro-Palestine, and they said that Israel is a colonial project, and so on and so forth. Long story. If you want to understand properly, watch that episode 7 of Geostrategy, in which I have explained everything in proper detail, in great detail. WRV1313 says, will we ever get Aksai Chin back, as China is far stronger than us? Also, why don't China ally with India? India and China together will be unstoppable. Well, when you are a much stronger nation, you don't seek allies, you seek vassals. That is the nature of power. If you want to understand why it is so, read texts like the Arthashastra, etc. So then you will understand why China doesn't want to ally with India. China would rather see an India that is broken up, or an India that is very weak, or an India that is a Chinese vassal. They don't want to ally with India. Historically, we have been the far greater civilization, but today we are a weaker nation because of the history of the past whatever years, right? Few decades, few centuries, and so on and so forth. Essentially, the past 8 decades. That's why China is about 3.5 or 4 times more powerful than us today. So why will they want India to be an ally when they can make India potentially a vassal, right? And India is the one Asian nation that they fear, because they know that India still has the potential to become the next China in the next 15 or so years, if we get our things right, if a lot of things go right for us. So why would China want to ally with us? They would rather keep us down. So then the question is, will we ever get Aksai Chin back? Someday we will. History is long. We won't get it back in the next 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. Who knows? It's possible. 100 years, very likely. It all depends on what we do and where we take our country. So we should not look at the next 2 weeks or next 3 months or next 3 years. We are the oldest civilization. We have a history that goes back now, I would say 12,000 years at least. So for us, what is 20 years, 50 years? What's 100 years for us? It's nothing. See it that way. Don't think as a small little nation state. Think like a civilization state. Of course, it goes beyond our lifetimes, but so what? Our descendants will get it, right? So we will get it back eventually. We may get a lot more in the future. Who knows? Who knows where history will take us? So let's not be, I would say, pessimistic. Let's not be defeatist. Things will work out. And we have to make things work out together. Vishal says, Iran launched 150 missiles on day 1, 75 on day 2, 40 then, now 10, 15, 20. It's decreasing day by day. How long can Iran save its ballistic missile launches? Well, it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen. Iran may also be signaling to the world that, look, we want to end this nonsense. We want an end to this war. They've also signaled, like I said 50 minutes ago, they've also signaled to the US via various mediators like Oman and Qatar, etc., that we would like this to end. If Israel stops the attacks, we will also stop the attacks. So they are signaling that they would like the war to end, right? It doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that they have lost their capabilities. They may still have a lot of aces up their sleeve. And it is also likely that Iran has way more ballistic missiles than Israel has Iron Dome missiles. That's also a likelihood. And even the US may not be able to, fill that gap potentially. So maybe Iran is trying to say that, you know what, we are willing to de-escalate if you are willing to de-escalate. And maybe if de-escalation doesn't happen, then you may see a much bigger surge of missiles coming in from Iran potentially. Or maybe you are right, and maybe their capabilities are being degraded day by day, and maybe they are becoming more and more helpless. That's also a possibility. But without us being there, we don't know. So I think we have to be cautious. I don't think Iran is that helpless right now. Ares Manticore says the opposition parties are promoting language racism to divide our country. Many influential people have also started supporting this foreign toolkit. Well, this is not something I'm going to take today. I'm not going to take local politics. I generally never take local politics, right? But I would say, in answer to your statement and question, it's very unfortunate, and it's very likely that there could be a foreign influence behind this. I think it's almost guaranteed that there is a foreign influence behind this, and we, the people, have to ensure that these forces, whoever they may be, I'm not naming anybody, but whoever they may be, they should not succeed. It's for us to ensure that such ploys, such tactics, such strategies do not succeed. Vaibhav Dangra says, shouldn't countries teach correct history? Vaibhav Dangra seems to be in Japan. Arigato, Dangra-san. So, shouldn't countries teach correct history? In Tokyo, Yakusuni Shrine Museum, they glorify and worship the Japanese Second World War army, There is incorrect information regarding Manchuria. There is no mention of Unit 731. Okay. Shouldn't countries teach correct history? Well, I would say ideally everybody should speak only the truth. But if you read the Arthashastra, you will see that nobody speaks the truth. So we don't live in an ideal world, right? Everybody is lying. Everybody is trying to peddle narratives. So then every nation will also try to promote its own narratives. Now, I'm not saying what happened during the Second World War. The conduct of the Japanese Imperial Army during the Second World War was abominable. No question about it. But is it the only army that was abominable? Do you have any idea of what the other non-Axis forces did? That's never mentioned. So shouldn't we also ask the same question about the Allies? And if we are not asking the question about the Allies, then why are we only asking questions about the defeated Japanese? The Japanese were defeated. They were smashed. They have been colonized. They have been brutalized. They have been enslaved. They're trying to hold on to some shred of pride of some kind. Right? So I would see, my point is, first of all, as an Indian who lives in Japan, I would say you should respect whatever the local people are trying to do. Okay? We should not be judgmental. And if you want to be judgmental, we should be equally judgmental towards everybody. What the Americans have done on Japan, they tested 2 nuclear weapons on the civilians. That's not the only thing they have done. What they did in Germany after the fall of the Third Reich, do you have any idea what was done in Germany? It was essentially genocide of the Germans in various parts of Europe. I mean, there's so many horrors that have happened that are completely suppressed. So shouldn't countries teach correct history? They should. But why are we singling out only one country? The country that has essentially suffered more than most countries. So, yeah, theoretically, you're right. Everybody should teach correct history. But shouldn't the US teach correct history? Shouldn't Europe teach correct history of what they have done in Africa? Shouldn't the US teach the history of what they did in the continent they stole from the natives? Right? They portray themselves as the champions of human rights and democracy while living on a land that has been genocided of the natives, and where natives today, even today, they live as second-class citizens. That goes for the entirety of the Americas, by the way, overall. So the point I'm trying to make is that nobody is going to teach correct history. Everybody is going to tell lies. That's the way of the world. At least in the current cycle that we're living in, Kali Yuga, everybody is going to lie. That's just the way it is. So, okay, Coral Jane says, what do you think is going to be Pakistan's role in the Israel-Iran war after Asim Munir's US visit? Is the US going to use Pakistan's air bases? If they do, how would the whole situation pan out? Well, first of all, please understand one thing very clearly. Pakistan is a complete 100% certified US vassal. Okay? Trump is deeply invested in Pakistan personally. His empire, the Trump business empire, is deeply invested in Pakistan. They stand a lot to gain from Pakistan. That's why Trump has this tremendous love for Pakistan. Now, in exchange for Trump's attentions and benevolence towards Pakistan, Pakistan will give whatever the US needs. So right now, one hears that there are American aircraft that are flying over Pakistani territory, looking into what's happening in Iran. Okay, reconnaissance aircraft and whatever, various kinds of aircraft, American aircraft, are flying over Pakistani territory. So Pakistan has opened its airspace to the Americans. Do whatever you want. It's all yours. We know that the Americans have been using the Noor Khan Air Base, and even Pakistani officers are off limits over there. The air base is off limits to Pakistanis. It's controlled by the Americans, the Noor Khan Air Base. I think that's now pretty much known to the world, right? So what could happen is the question in this Israel-Iran war. So if the US decides in the next few days, maybe in a week, maybe in 3 days, maybe in 30 days, whenever they decide, possibly, that they want to launch some kind of operation on Iraq, which means on Iran, which means that the US, if they decide that they will get involved in the war, then they could very much use Pakistani air bases as the staging grounds of their airstrikes or whatever, right? And if it happens, there's nothing much Iran can do about it. Maybe Iran can try and hit Pakistani air bases. Maybe Iran can do that. But if the US gets involved, it's going to be a big global, not global, but regional war. If it is happening from Pakistan, then even Pakistan gets dragged into the war, and Pakistan may take some damage from Iranian missile strikes and so on. So if the US decides to use Pakistani air bases in territory, then even Pakistan will get dragged into the war. That's how it could pan out. But if the US decides that it's gonna get involved, then it's gonna be very bad days for Iran, because the US is all powerful, as we know. Arun says, recent Times Now article said that Israel wanted to strike Pakistan nuclear site. India said no. I also heard US made Israel stop their plans, which is true. Well, we don't know. There are multiple versions of the story going around right now. What I had heard or read back in the day, whenever it was, years ago, is that Israel decided to pull out at the last moment. Now some people are claiming that it was the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Morarji Desai, who stopped Israel from using Indian air bases and denied Israel permission to use Indian air bases. I am not sure which story is true, but understand it from this perspective. Pakistan has always been a US asset for decades, and Israel and the US have this special relationship. So the question is, why would Israel destroy something that is a US asset? Doesn't make sense, right? I think there is some kind of understanding. Let's, like in the episode of geostrategy that I just concluded today, we saw that there was a secret Iran-Israel alliance in the 1980s when Saddam Hussein and Iran were fighting, and Israel was supplying Iran with arms, ammunition, etc., despite officially the two nations being enemies. So I think there could be a similar situation between Israel and Pakistan. Okay, that's what I think. I have no evidence to back it up, but I have historical precedents, which I just gave you, that such things happen. And it is also possible that the Americans may actually have told Israel, don't go ahead and bomb the Pakistani nuclear facilities. We want this to be an eyewash so that we can provide Pakistan with our nuclear weapons and then claim that these are Pakistani nukes. That's also a possibility. So we don't quite know what the real story is. Various people will make various claims, but what evidence do they have to back up their claims? I'm not sure what evidence they have. Even I don't have evidence to back up the claims, but I can offer you historical precedents that show you that things happen in such ways. Shubham says some people are praising and glorifying Portuguese trade and architecture, ignoring reality. 300 plus pilgrims were burned in 1502, Goa massacres in 1510, 2 centuries of torture and forced conversions during the Goa Inquisition. What's my take? My take is that the Portuguese were barbarians. The Portuguese were utter barbarians. They came into India, they captured some territory, they violently oppressed the people, they destroyed temples, they built churches on temples, they forced Indians to become Christians by force, by coercion. Those Indians who refused to become Christian, even after converting, they were burned at the stake. Okay, they had these activities called auto da fe, in which people were burned alive because they were secretly practicing their ancestral culture despite officially becoming Christian, and so on. Absolute horror show. The Portuguese were utter barbarians. Their conduct was barbaric. And today, if some people are praising and glorifying those people, those people should be ashamed. How can you glorify and praise what the Portuguese did in India? Their behavior, their conduct was barbaric. It was abominable. And the people who are praising that should be ashamed of themselves. That's my take on that. MK says Dwarka is 9,500 years old. It's mentioned in the Mahabharata. The Rig Veda is older than the Mahabharata. So Rig Veda could be over 9,500 years old. Look, the Dwarka, we know that Dwarka is maybe 9,500 years old. Okay, we have carbon dating evidence from a piece of wood that goes back about 8,000 something years, and it's most likely older than that. So maybe it's 9,500 years old. Maybe it's 10,000 years old. Dwarka. Now, Dwarka is mentioned in the Rig Veda and in the Mahabharata. And in the Mahabharata, it is said that there was a major earthquake and Dwarka was swallowed up by the sea. during the time of the Mahabharata. Okay, I agree. But is it not possible that Dwarka may be 5,000 years older than the Mahabharata? And it was still existing during the time of the Mahabharata? It's possible, right? So maybe the Mahabharata was written, I'm just giving a completely hypothetical date. Maybe let's say the Mahabharata happened, let's say hypothetically 5,000 years ago. And Dwarka existed then. But maybe Dwarka also existed 5,000 years before that. And let's say the Rig Veda, we know it's older than the Mahabharata. Maybe let's say hypothetically the Rig Veda is 3,000 years older than the Mahabharata. So the Mahabharata hypothetically happened 5,000 years ago. The Rig Veda was written 3,000 years before that, hypothetically. So the Rig Veda is 8,000 years old. And maybe Dwarka was existed even before that, possibly. So that way the math doesn't add up. You understand what I'm saying? So the Rig Veda could possibly be over 9,500 years old, or maybe it's younger than that. We don't know. We don't know for sure. The clearest way of dating the Rig Veda is by looking at the evidence of the Saraswati. We know at what point in time the Saraswati was at her peak. We know at what point in time the Saraswati started declining slowly as a river. We know at what point in time the Saraswati dried out to a large extent. And the Rig Veda mentions the Saraswati as a river in her prime. And the Saraswati was last in her prime around 6,000 BC. That's around 8,000 years ago. So it indicates the Rig Veda is more likely to have been written around 6,000 BC than around 1500 BC. That is the best estimate I can give you. Beyond that, I can't say until we find further evidence of some kind. Yashwant says, are we heading towards World War III, 1919 Spanish flu, 1929 Great Depression, 1939 World War II, World War II. Now the same thing happens, COVID, recession, World War III, so many wars happening. Well, maybe not. I hope not. It is not necessary that the pattern that happened 100 years ago has to exactly happen in the same way this time. Maybe it will happen in a different way this time. This time around. So the pattern you saw in the beginning of the 20th century, there is no reason for it to occur exactly in the same sequence, same order, and same magnitude all over again. History is cyclical, but it's not a carbon copy of what happened in the past. So one hopes that it doesn't go in that direction. I know there are lots of wars happening. We are in a period of geopolitical instability. It's getting worse. But hopefully there's no world war. We've had the COVID, which was terrible. So the pattern seems to be there, but hopefully it doesn't occur exactly the same way as before. That's what I would say. It's not guaranteed that it will happen that way. But yeah, it's kind of concerning. So I agree with you, it's concerning. Only James says, which countries would be part of Akhand Bharat? It's up to you. Entirely up to you. Historically, Akhand Bharat was Jambudweep, the whole of the subcontinent south of the Himalayas, plus Gandhar and all, and so on. Historically, our boundaries, the India, Central Asia boundary was at the gates, at a certain gate in Tajikistan. Yeah, so when Chinggis Khan crossed that gate, he was in India, which was currently about 100 kilometers inside Tajikistan. And so on. So India had a huge sphere of influence. Geographically, it was Jambudweep, so we would have Afghanistan, Pakistan as part of it, also Nepal, present-day Bangladesh, and the sea regions, which is Sri Lanka, Maldives, etc., and so on. And civilizationally, we went much beyond that, which is the whole of the Swarna Bhumi, Southeast Asia, and so on and so forth. So it's open to interpretation. But I think the subcontinent was Akhand Bharat, mainly the subcontinent. Govind says, today Prime Minister Modi said Trump did not mediate ceasefire, to which Trump replied he did. How should Modi respond now? Mr. Modi should ignore this nonsense from the Honorable President of the United States, Shri Donald Trump ji. There's no point engaging in this verbal slinging tit for tat thing. Trump is blatantly lying. He also lied today that Mr. Modi was just now in the White House before Mr. Munir was there. Mr. Trump is known to prevaricate. So Mr. Modi should not respond to Mr. Trump. Geopolitical Dubey says, did the Gupta Empire start building grand temples? I'm not sure what the problem with the grand temples that we have, all are in ruins. The problem is that we don't know how to date them. You can't carbon date rock. Rock is inorganic, right? The problem is we can't carbon date rocks. So I'm not sure how these so-called historians and archaeologists assign various dates to the temples. For example, in Egypt, if you look at the pyramids, if you look at the Sphinx is clearly way older than the pyramids. And yet they say it was built around so and so date. So these people, they come out with these dates, they pull the dates out of a hat, it looks like. So we don't know when we started building the grand temples. It's possible that many of our grand temples are way older than what historians claim. For example, the Padmanabha Swami temple in Kerala, it has coins that date back far before the temple is supposed to be built and so on. So I'm not sure when we started building grand temples. We've always had great dynasties, great kingdoms and empires in this country that go back way beyond the Nanda Empire, way before the Nanda Empire. We have all these lineages recorded in our history texts. Some of them survive, but these are not mapped one to one with various archaeological sites, because we kind of have lost that continuity. So it's possible that grand temples were being built way before the Gupta Empire. It's possible. One example is Kanishka. Kanishka built a grand stupa, which kind of still exists in Peshawar today, but it's today a slum. There's a slum on top of it, and so on. So it's possible that grand temples were being built before the Guptas also, but classically they said that it's the Guptas who began this great practice of building great temples, which I find hard to believe. I'm sure it was being done before the Guptas also. So I really don't know for sure. Rahul says large Shia Muslims in India trace their roots to ancient migrations from Syria, Lebanon, Iran. Backed by history, genetics confirm Levantine haplogroups absent in non-Muslims but present in Shia Muslims. Forgotten history? It's possible. Look, people forget history, especially when it's not written down, especially when your records are destroyed or whatever. For example, do most people today know who their great-great-grandfather was, who one of their great-great-grandmothers was? Do you know the names? It's so easy to forget history. And if you've been in India for, let's say, 700 years, 800 years, even 500 years, you kind of, the origins are lost in time. They become kind of legends or even myths. But yeah, genetics is good in bringing these things out. So maybe it's forgotten history. Syria, Lebanon, Iran, even Yemen. Even Yemen has, some kind of, there is some Yemenis component also in various Shia Muslim groups in India. So it's part of history. It's part of how things go. People go back and forth, back and forth. There is no one, a single line of migration or whatever. It's always waves and back and forth migration and so on. Especially when you have a gigantic place like this Indian subcontinent, which is so rich and capable of sustaining gigantic population. You have people coming in all the time and settling down. So not surprising, but clearly forgotten history. So yeah, you're right. Okay, I'm going to do another 15 minutes and then we're done. Right? Tanmay Pant says, Kiev was a Viking state. How did the Slavs bounce back? Well, that's a long history. You'll have to go into the history of the Kievan Rus. The leaders were Vikings, of course, but the people were Slavic, and eventually the Slavs they were just larger in number, numerically, and so on. And that's how. So the Slavs were not colonized by the Vikings, but they had. It's kind of, it was kind of like the Mitanni kingdom. The Mitanni Empire, was an Indo-Aryan, Indian origin Aryan superstate over a local Hurrian population. So the royalty was Indo-Aryan. They spoke Sanskrit, but the people were the Hurrian people who spoke the Hurrian language. But the empire was of Indo-Aryan origin. But eventually, today there's no Aryan language being spoken in the region, in Syria, in the Anatolia region, where the Mitanni Empire is to exist. So the people there would still today have a little bit of Indian ancestry, but nobody will know about it. So that's how eventually, the superstates, they dissolve into the population, and then the population, its cultural identity takes over. So that's, I suppose, how it happened for Kiev, the Kievan Rus. Shaswat says, how might global society have evolved differently if a universal language like Esperanto had achieved the worldwide adoption and integration? I have no idea. I've been hearing about Esperanto since I was a kid. It's an artificial language similar to various European languages made up, and some people speak it. I don't know what's the purpose of it. It's completely artificial, completely made up. And Esperanto means hopeful or something. But what difference does it make? And why would somebody adopt a foreign language? For example, let me tell you, we in India have a civilizational history that goes back 10, 12, 15, God knows how many thousands of years. We have our own languages, which are the oldest languages in the world. Why would we accept a foreign made up artificial language? Why? Makes no sense. And why do we need worldwide adoption and integration? Why do we need the whole society to speak just one language and become a monoculture of sorts? Why? The world is beautiful because of genuine diversity, regional diversity. We don't want all the diversity to be in one place. We want that when we travel to different places, we find different cultures, different languages, different ways of life. That's what makes the world beautiful. If we impose just one language, one culture on the whole thing, it makes the world ugly. So I am not in a favor of Esperanto or whatever. I've never understood its import, its purpose, its meaning. Kind of a delusional kind of thing to do. Like, what was his name? Like the guy who wrote the book Utopia during the time of Henry VIII. Thomas More. Utopia. There's no such thing as utopia in the world. Okay. Gaurav Singh says, what's the origin of the Rajput people of India? And is their lineage the same as the Kshatriyas from the past? Similar to how the Brahmins have a continuous lineage? Please do an episode of it on it if possible. An episode will be... Okay, but I can answer the question. Look, 1,000 years ago, in the year 1000 AD, nobody called themselves Rajputs. Nobody did. The word did not exist. Then eventually this term called Rajyaputra came into existence, and that's the origin of the word Rajput. So who are the Rajaputras? They are the descendants of the original dynasties of India, the royal dynasties, royal clans. And according to various authors and sources, there are about 33 royal dynasties in India, dating back to post-Rigvedic times, dating back to the Vedic age. So these dynasties have been around in India for thousands of years, and 33 in number apparently. And the descendants of those dynasties, the descendants of the old royalty, they called themselves the Rajaputras, and they were at the forefront of fighting the Turkic invasions of India, and they fought for several centuries, and eventually others took up the good fight eventually later, like the Marathas and so on and so forth. So the origin of the Rajput people is the origin of all the people of India, but they were the aristocracy, the royalty. So they were warriors, of course, but their lineage is not necessarily the same as the other Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas are the warrior class of India. They were the people engaged in warfare, but they were not necessarily the descendants of kings. So on. So we all have a continuous lineage, all of us, no matter what your lineage is, whatever your caste, so-called caste is, we all have lineages going back tens of thousands of years. Okay? So it's not just that the Rajputs or so-and-so, the Brahmins or whoever has ancient lineages. We all have tremendously ancient lineages. We are the oldest non-African population on the surface of the planet. And we are all essentially the same people genetically. Okay? That's what we have to remember. Geopolitical Dubai, thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Very kind of you. Arun says, why countries like Thailand, Cambodia, and many Southeast Asian countries don't hate the Chola invaders from outside? Usually, the people who are invaded hate their invaders. Well, the Chola invasion was a one-off event. The thing is this, see, we have to understand this one thing and get it very clear. It was not the Chola invasion of Sri Vijaya that brought Hinduism and Sanskrit into Southeast Asia, into Suvarnabhumi. That's not the case. The Indianization of the whole of Southeast Asia began at least 3,000 years ago. It began with the voyages of the great merchants from Kalinga, across the Sea of Kalinga, today called the Bay of Bengal, into Suvarnabhumi. That's Thailand, Indonesia, Cambodia, and so on and so forth, all of that. And this happened over centuries, over thousands of years. And slowly these regions, the people of these regions, they absorbed Indian culture, Indian religion, Indian language, and they all became Indianized. The first ever Cambodian kingdom was the kingdom of Funan, and that kingdom was founded by a, a Cambodian princess, and she married an Indian merchant called Kondinia. So they were the founders of the Funan kingdom, which eventually became today's Cambodia, and so on. So all of these different regions, the whole of Southeast Asia, all the different cultures there, they all eventually over centuries became Indianized. And the Indianization did not happen through force. They just absorbed our culture because they saw it as possibly superior to whatever lifestyle and culture they had. So they slowly absorbed our culture, and they built such incredible, beautiful temples. Angkor Wat, my God, Prambanan in Indonesia, the various Shiva temples in the Champa region, the Priya Vihar temple, for which Cambodia and Thailand are still fighting, and so on, which is a Shiva temple. So the Indianization, Hinduization, all of that happened over centuries, over millennia. It was never done by force. The local people, local cultures absorbed this willingly, and they syncretized it with their own culture. So wherever you go in Southeast Asia, wherever Hinduism still exists, it eventually became Buddhism, but same thing. So it's a very syncretic kind of culture with lots of indigenous elements, ancestral elements, syncretized with Indian civilization and culture. The Chola invasion was a one-off thing. It was a geopolitical event. And once again, it was not an oppressive event. We did not go and enslave people and massacre people and all that. It was just, that's a whole different story. So, yeah, that's why there is no hate for Indians or Cholas. Absolutely none. Because we were never oppressive. We were never colonizers. We were never extractive. We never enslaved anybody. We never stole people's wealth. We enriched them, actually. That's how it was. Yeah, that's why there's no hatred. Vamshi Kalam says, no Bahlika, kingdom of Bhishma Empire, Bhishma uncle and Kapisa in Afghanistan. Bahlik, yeah, it's today, that region is called Balkh today. Bahlik. And Kapisa is Kabul, I suppose. The names changed eventually. Pushklavati became Peshawar. Pushklavati was also known as Purushpur, and then it became Peshawar. Bahlika became Balkh. Kapisa became the Kabul region, and so on. And of course, this is Gandhar. So that element of the Kaurava people, the maternal ancestry of the Kauravas was from Gandhar, obviously, right? Today's Afghanistan, and so on. The Rational Reporter says, is it possible if Iran falls, then Pakistan loses utility for the US? The US shifts full-time focus on China. China starts closing off with India. Pakistan neglected and effed up. Well, I would love to see Pakistan effed up, but that's not the case. See, let's say Iran falls hypothetically. We don't want that to happen because it's terrible. But let's say Iran falls. Then will Pakistan lose utility for the US? My dear friends, as long as India exists, Pakistan is very useful for the US. Very useful. The US wants two things for Pakistan. First of all, Pakistan should no longer go and get into bed with China. Secondly, Pakistan should continue to destabilize India permanently. Then how can Pakistan ever lose utility? Iran is a sideshow. Iran is a sideshow. India and China are the big deal. Right now, India is useful for the US against China. That's why they want India and China to remain enemies. But eventually, India is also a problem for the US. The US doesn't want any new poles emerging anywhere. So Pakistan is not going to lose its utility. Not going to happen. Lavkesh Singh says, do you know about the breakthrough in quantum computing from DRDO-IITD Delhi? I heard that they've achieved some kind of breakthrough in quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement has been sustained over a distance of more than a kilometer. That's fantastic. Great job. It's a good breakthrough. It's good progress. We want quantum entanglement to happen over hundreds of kilometers. So why doesn't India launch its own version of the Mishus satellite? The Chinese have launched one, and they were able to entangle a pair of particles, photons or whatever it was, between the satellite and a ground station in China. So I think it's great. I'm aware of it. I've not looked into the details, but I've heard the news that we have entangled a pair of particles, a single quantum system over a distance of more than a kilometer, apparently. So good progress. Keep on going. Extend it to 10 kilometers and 100 kilometers. Then let's extend it to the Andromeda galaxy. It's possible. Rishikesh says, hey Chavda, hey Chavda. Did foreign powers ever try to sabotage India's nuclear program? Well, I have not been a part of the Indian nuclear program, so I can't say that. But it's very likely that foreign powers have tried to do that. It makes sense. If of all the nuclear programs that exist on the planet, which are the ones? The US was the original nuclear program, the Manhattan Project. Then the Russians got some info from there, from the Manhattan Project via various sources, and they did their own nuclear program through that. Then you have the British, the French, who all were helped by the US. Then you had the Chinese, who were helped by Russia. Then you had Iran, then you had Israel and South Africa also for a while, that also got know-how from the US and other allied nations. It was only India that developed a nuclear program entirely independently without any foreign help. And of course, it is guaranteed that foreign powers would have tried to sabotage the nuclear program. Maybe it's still ongoing. But the details will not come out because it is a very classified kind of information, very highly sensitive information, and the details won't come out. So, don't know. Nilay says, as per physicists, neutrino can travel a light year thick wall of steel without interaction. So why are neutrinos not considered dark matter? Well, because we can detect them. Neutrinos are not considered to be dark matter because we can still detect them. We have these gigantic neutrino detectors deep underground in Japan, Super Kamiokande and wherever else, that can detect a few neutrinos in a year, solar neutrinos. Okay, so that's why, because they interact via the weak interaction, and they do occasionally interact with electromagnetic matter like heavy water or whatever. That's why we are able to detect this through scintillation technology and whatever else, and that's why it's not dark matter. The question is, what is dark matter? Dark matter is that mysterious unknown matter that affects the rotation curves of galaxies. So when you see the speed at which a galaxy is rotating, we can see the speed at which a galaxy is rotating. How can we see that? I mean, if you look at a galaxy, it's not moving, right? But we still know that the galaxies are rotating because of the red shift and blue shift of the stars at the two ends of the galaxy. So we can know which direction the galaxy is rotating in and at what speed it's rotating. Now, if you plot that against the expected speed of rotation, you'll find that galaxies are rotating at a very different speed, as if they have 10 times the mass. And that's the hidden matter that was discovered through galaxy rotation curves, dark matter, which is not neutrino matter. It is something else entirely. It seems to interact only gravitationally. It doesn't have the weak interaction, the strong interaction, or the electromagnetic interaction. It seems to have only the gravitational interaction. It's a different class of matter. It's not neutrinos. So you could argue that neutrinos are also some kind of undetectable, largely undetectable particle, but that's not what is causing the galaxies to rotate in a different way. It's not neutrinos. It's something else. And that's the dark matter we are looking for. Hardik says, North Korea is also testing missiles. The problem is that you close your eyes and point anywhere on the map, and a war is happening, it's on the rise. What are my thoughts? It's all interconnected. The world is bifurcating. There's a visible, ongoing bifurcation of the world order. Maybe trifurcation, mainly bifurcation. So it's the Western order, the US-led order, versus the Russia-China-led order. And part of the Russia-China coalition, you have Iran, you have North Korea. That's about it, more or less. So North Korea also wants to ensure that nobody comes in, tries to do what is being done to Iran right now. So North Korea, first of all, they have nuclear weapons, a decent quantity perhaps of nuclear weapons. We don't know what the number is, but decent quantity. And they have the missiles to deliver the nuclear weapons. So they are continuously testing the missiles and reminding the world, don't mess with us. And that's a signal to the world, especially the West. So that's the deal right now. There are wars happening in other places. There are conflicts happening in Africa. Nobody's paying attention to them. I mean, tremendous amounts of people are being displaced. There's a horrific humanitarian catastrophe going on in Sudan right now, where the government and the other forces are fighting each other, and the civilians are caught in the crossfire deliberately, perhaps, and so on. So the world has entered a period of great geopolitical instability. It's because of the rise of new powers and the rise of powers that are still not great powers, but that naturally will rise, like India and so on. And there are existing powers that don't want this to happen. So there's tremendous churn happening in the world. So that's the deal. And this is going to intensify, unfortunately. That's the direction in which the world is going. Intensified instability. MK says, what lessons did the US learn from the UK's fall as an empire? The UK never fell as an empire. The entity still continues in the form of the US. There was just a transfer of power from London to Washington. The UK never fell. And of course, you can learn some lessons from the UK's fall as an empire. The UK was too small. The UK was... see, the problem of the UK is that it's a small island, and it's very close to traditional enemies like France, like Germany. It's in very close proximity to these enemies. So it's always under threat, no matter how powerful it is. Because if you strike at London, if you strike at the heartland, then the whole empire can collapse like a pack of cards. So what lesson did the US learn? Be far away from enemies. So look at the map. Look at the map. Okay, I'll show you the map. The US has ensured it is completely isolated from the enemies. If you look at the map, the US is surrounded on two sides by gigantic oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. And it has ensured that all the nations in the Americas are their vassals, and they pose no threat whatsoever to the US. So the Americans have learned their lessons very well. Okay. Kumar Kanishka says, fascinated about dark matter and dark energy. Could you suggest where to read about and learn about it? Miss your science episodes. Please do it once a month, please. Okay. Well, I would love to do it, but nobody watches. Nobody watches. Nobody cares. I would love to talk about science every day, but nobody watches. I mean, I've got this live stream going on, a recorded live stream on loop playing about science, about the science episodes. I mean, I typically see there's one or two people watching it. There's no interest. What can I do about it? How to read and learn about dark matter and dark energy? Well, I don't know. Popular science books I would have to recommend, right? Okay, let me tell you. I think one of the first videos I ever did was a recommendation video about books. Let me see. So this is my channel. Let's go to the oldest videos and look at these goofy videos that I made here. So here's a video, 14 or so minutes long, books for understanding quantum theory and dark matter. I think you should look at this video. In this video, I must have recommended some reasonably good books. Hopefully not very technical books, but books that most people could hopefully understand. So I think if you look at that video, you should get some answers. But off the top of my head, I don't know any popular science books about dark matter, dark energy, because I don't really read popular science books, so I don't know. Yeah, so please check out that video. Hopefully you get answers from that. And Ankita ji, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Not asking a question, but so thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Rohan says, can the Indian private sector make world-class weapons? The answer, in very short and very brief, is 100% yes. We saw some of that during Operation Sindoor. Oh, we absolutely saw that. So the answer is very much yes, we can. Sam the Gamer says, what geopolitical threat does a pro-US puppet Iran pose for India? What key strategic benefits or perks would we lose? Love the Geostrategy show. Well, I'm glad you love it. And if you watch episode 7 of Geostrategy that I did just before this episode, you will have all the answers in that. So I'll tell you what, briefly. If you have a puppet government in Iran, which is a US puppet government, then it becomes like an extension of Pakistan. So right now you have Iran that is allied with China and Russia, and it has good relations with India. It doesn't do anything that would be detrimental to Indian interests overall, right? And it's not a great friend of China, of Pakistan. Iran and Pakistan don't have good relations, I promise you that. So it kind of keeps Pakistan also balanced out. Now, if you have a pro-US government in Iran, it goes back to the 1960s when Iran was very, very anti-India. Iran supported Pakistan during the 1965 war against India, and so on. So you will have an India that is increasingly isolated in the region. And that is terrible for us. So that's the short answer. If you want the proper detailed answer, watch episode 7 of Geostrategy. Anyhow, thank you so much. Okay, Galliver, thank you first of all. The question is, how long will embedded C be a relevant skill set? For your information, one of the few software development areas precluded from AI gluttony. For example, OpenWRT Tomato. Okay. How long will embedded C be a relevant skill set? Embedded C. And that's not something I have really worked on during my time in the IT industry. I have obviously used C in the past, but I used it in the sense of using it for physics purposes. Physics. I'm not sure about embedded C. Not sure. Not sure. One of the few software development areas precluded from AI gluttony. OpenWRT Tomato. Let me try and Google this tomato and embedded C. What is that? Maybe that'll give me some clues. Okay, embedded C, tomato. Wholetomato.com. Okay, so I'm not familiar with this stuff, clearly. I have not been using any of this. If I do use any programming today, I would typically use Python. So I'm sorry, I'm not aware of the context, and I'm not aware of embedded C and tomato and all that. So I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer the question. But I think AI gluttony will eventually take over everything. That's what I'm seeing. I mean, no matter what, whether it is Node.js, whether it is C++, whether it is Java, whether it is Python, AI does everything. So I don't know, maybe it's a matter of time if it is still not part of the AI gluttony, I would imagine. Arun says, Iran getting nukes, good or bad for India? I would say not very good. We don't want more nuclear powers in the region, but I would very much want Iran to remain a sovereign nation the way it is right now and not become a US puppet, one more US puppet in the region. But yeah, I would not be very pleased with Iran getting nukes. Govind says, do you think if Biden was president, he would have supported Israel with the same intensity as Trump is doing currently? I think Biden would have supported Israel, but maybe perhaps not with the same intensity that Trump is doing, or maybe perhaps with more intensity. The thing is that it doesn't matter who is the US president. They always support Israel, whoever it is. So it makes no real difference. So I think it would not really make much of a difference. Wooden Armor says, in your TRS podcast, you mentioned the Indian IT industry would collapse soon. As someone who is just starting out my career in IT, what's your advice? Should I transition fields or continue learning AI tools? The majority of the Indian IT industry could collapse because AI will take over all those low-level jobs, all the programming, testing, etc. jobs. But if you upskill in such a way that you can use AI as a manager would use resources, coders, programmers, then you would do well in AI, in IT. So IT will continue. The Indian IT industry, the way it is constructed, the way it is architected, it's all about labor arbitrage, right? In the US, a programmer will charge X amount of dollars per hour. In India, we can charge 1/3 of that. So that's why the US companies will outsource to India. But now, because of AI, sitting in the US, I will not need to hire any employees. I will just have, get AI agents to do the work for me that Indian or other programmers would do at a fraction of the cost that even Indian programmers would charge. That's the problem we are facing today. And that's why the Indian IT industry could collapse unless they somehow drastically change their business models and so on. So if you're just starting out your career in IT, it depends what you want to do. You want to be a programmer, or you want to be an employee in some big corporation, in which case your job could be very, very much under threat. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, for example, or if you want to be somebody who is skilled in AI itself, such that you can be the manager, the project manager who handles AI agent employees, then you will do well. So that's what I have to say to you. But overall, if the typical Indian person who gets into the IT field typically wants to have a long career as a climbing the corporate ladder, you start at the bottom level as a programmer or a QR tester or something. Then you slowly become a team leader, then a project leader, then a project manager, then a delivery manager, and so on and so forth. But that is a process that takes many, many years. And by that, in many years have passed, AI will have transformed everything. So I think the IT field is right now in a, you know, in a period of great transition. And if you're at the bottom levels, you will be, it's very likely, unfortunately, that you might be made redundant. So my advice is that if you want to remain in IT, if you want to be in IT, you have to become AI native. You have to become somebody who is AI first. And if you can find a way of doing that, I think you will do fine. Pre-LTP says, how RIIA and CFR, its branches, are able to effectively manage foreign policy while we fail to manage our policy completely. Now, what is RIIA and CFR? I don't know. Let me Google that. What is RIIA? RIIA. Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House. What is CFR? Council for Foreign Research. They're not managing foreign policy. They are tools of narrative building and so on. They're not managing anybody's foreign policy. They're tools in somebody's toolkit. Of course, they're tools in creating narratives and propagating narratives. They're essentially propaganda tools. And these are ancient weapons that have evolved over time. And we have not done this. So we also need to invest in these institutions and things and learn from our adversaries. Yes. Okay, I think we need to stop now. I still have so many super chats to get through. Please stop. I'll try and churn through the super chats and then I'll be done. Vivek says, during Aurangzeb's rule, Maharaja Raj Singh and Shivaji formed an alliance against Mughals. But the next gen couldn't continue the alliance. Why so? Look, I am not a specialist. I have not studied Mughal history and Maratha history and all that. I don't know. The Indian history I am interested in, that fascinates me, is ancient Indian history. The politics of the Mughal Turkic occupation of India is depressing, and that's why I've never bothered to study it. So I don't know. I don't know what happened in what year and who allied with whom and what happened the next generation. I'm not really sure. I'm sorry. Sarang says, what's next for India and Canada? India versus Canada. What about Khalistan? Looks like there are good signs. Prime Minister Carney has shown encouraging signs of wanting to have better relations with India. And the Khalistanis wanted to sabotage Mr. Modi's trip to Canada, but did not work out for them. So looks like we are on a good path. Possibly. We'll have to wait and watch. We can certainly trust, but we'll have to verify. Canada has a long track record of supporting Khalistan and being anti-India. Maybe Mr. Carney has good intentions. So let's see. Looks like things are better compared to when Mr. Trudeau was in charge. But I would not expect the support for the Khalistan thing to go away that rapidly. It's a very big asset that they've cultivated over decades, and they will not give it up that easily. So I think it will remain behind the scenes for now. Maybe it will be brought out again whenever required. But as of now, things are okay. The past few days that we've seen. But it's too early to make any, to jump to any conclusions, I would say. Too early. Animesh says, given our low education spending and poor infrastructure in most institutions, is raising the budget the first step to reform? We have the talent. How do we begin to harness it effectively? If you want to reform educational institutions, raising the budget will make no difference. It will make no difference. You will be wasting more money into the same snake pits. Okay? So raising the budget is not the step to reform. You have to think it through properly. And I will not get into the details. I have various episodes that I've dedicated to education. If you want to see the episodes, I will tell you what episodes they are, in which I've spoken about this in great depth, in great detail. Multiple episodes in which I've spoken about education. Let's go. Let me show you which those are. I think 28. So Ask Abhijit 28, 30, and 31. The answers you will find in there. What needs to be done about the education system, what kind of reforms need to be done. Spending more money without changing the structure, architecture, and quality is going to be a complete waste of money. Geopolitical Dubey says, any thoughts on British King Charles III? No thoughts about him. I don't know. He's just another king. Yeah, I really haven't given much thought to him. It makes no difference, really. His mom was in charge. Now he's in charge. In charge of what? I'm not really sure. So yeah, no thoughts as such. No thoughts. Web of Dangra says about the Japanese question, you're right, the correct history is always hidden from the masses. Top players are only showing us what they want to show us. And this is it's a pattern you will see all across the world. Even in India, our history is hidden from us, right? In India, all these textbooks, all these professors, universities, colleges, they all teach fake history. It's a big project that started in the 1800s and it's still ongoing. And you will see the same thing all over the world. History is a form of narrative and propaganda. So yeah, that's the way things are, unfortunately. It would be nice if true history was taught, but it's not the case. Pratap VGM says, will China and Russia throw their weight behind Iran if ground invasion? If there's a ground invasion, I think there's very little Russia or China can do to stop the ground invasion. So what Russia and China can do, especially Russia, is they can try to mediate and prevent a ground invasion of Iran. But if the US decides there should be a ground invasion, first of all, they will have to spend several weeks and months assembling the armed forces, the army, and the components of the ground invasion. Only then can a ground invasion be launched. It's not that easy. You need all the components in place. So if you look at the invasion of Iraq in 1991, the Americans spent several months building up the coalition and putting all the pieces in place before the invasion. Even in 2003, something similar happened. So it's not that easy to just suddenly launch a ground invasion. It can't happen that way. But if they do that, then if they start putting the pieces in place, then Russia and China will have some time, a certain window of time, to make it difficult for the Americans to carry forward the ground invasion. But if the invasion is actually launched, I don't think Russia can come in the way or China can come in the way. Won't be possible. Vidhi says, can't Bharat empower Baloch and build new Pak internally? How? Balochistan is over there. How do we empower the Baloch and build a new Pak internally? We don't want to build a new Pakistan internally in India. By the way, no, thank you. That's the last thing we want to do. We may have a Pakistan in India, actually. So many Pakistanis have apparently been living in India for decades and all. So if you want to empower Balochistan, it will have to be done in a very different way, in a very subtle way. Maybe Iran can be involved, maybe Afghanistan can be involved, if possible. Maybe not. Otherwise, we can use our own ways of doing it. But yeah. Aradhya says, all illegal immigrants will be again converted in Europe? I have no idea. Aries Manticore says, should we start using AI to study our own indigenous biology and create an effective nutrition plan, medicines tailored to the Indian subcontinent? That's a good idea, right? If you can have an indigenous AI system and give it access to a data set of, let's say, 10,000 Indian genomes, that sort of thing, then it would be a very powerful tool to have. That will tell us what are the potential genetic problems we face, what kind of nutrition is best for us, and so on and so forth. That's a great idea, and it makes a lot of sense. Millerine says, is the deep state involved in illegal immigration in the EU? In the EU, I would say yes. When you say deep state, you mean the US? I'm sure the US is behind the illegal immigration in the EU to destabilize the EU and make sure that it doesn't become a threat again long term, like in the future, like you had in the past. The marching boots, the Hugo Boss uniforms. Bhavya Bhaskar, thank you so much, sir. And Bhavya Bhaskar has another question. What's your view on the debate of Chanakya and Kautilya in being different? Is there any proof stating them to be the same? Indologists have been debating this. Well, I haven't come across this debate. This is the good old story in India. Try and break everything apart, try and deconstruct everything, try and raise questions about history. Now, Chanakya and Kautilya are different people, really? I haven't heard about this, I'm sorry. I mean, Vasudev and Krishna and Gopal, we have multiple names. No, Vasudev was not Krishna, obviously. Vasudev was the dad. But we have so many names for Krishna. We have so many names for Arjuna. We have so many names historically for all great people. Right? Who was Gudakesh? Gudakesh was Arjun. So now will people start claiming that Gudakesh and Arjun were different entities, different people? That's what people can do. I mean, that's what leftists do to try and create chaos in India's historiography and so on. Well, ICBM says, why did India-Seychelles Assumption Island deal fail? Because of foreign interference, because Seychelles is an important strategic location. If India has a base there, naval base or surveillance base, it is good for India, and then the West doesn't like it, the US doesn't like it. So the Island deal failed because of Western interference, and that's why we have other deals. It's because of foreign interference. Dheeraj Kamath says, do Indian national and the dharmic civilizational interests really align? Why shouldn't Hindus welcome Ayatollah's fall as a blow to political Islamism? Look, I will not go into this question again. If you want to understand, if you want to look at geopolitics from a narrow religious perspective, then you will not understand geopolitics. What can I say to you? You can view it whichever way you want. I can stop you. But the Iran matter is not to be the Afghanistan matter is not to be looked at from a religious perspective. So my point is, look, if you want to really understand things, watch my geostrategy episode that I did before this live stream. If you have the time to watch it properly. You will understand something, hopefully. Because if the Ayatollahs fall, then you will have a pro-US government there, which is the same as a much larger Pakistan. And then later on, people will cry that India has let everything fall apart. There are another loss for India, that sort of thing. It's a very narrow perspective to look at everything from just a religious perspective. Of course, I agree that the Ayatollahs have no love for us, but they aren't the kind of enemies. They aren't enemies for us. They don't have the Taliban has no love for India, but they have no hatred for India either. They hate Pakistan. Similarly, Iran has no love for India as such, especially the government, but they don't have any hatred for India the way Pakistan does. Understand things. There are nuances in the world. You have to understand. You have to learn to understand nuances. And the big question is: do Indian national and dharmic civilizational interests really align? Well, today India is a nation state. India is not a civilization state or a dharmic state. So the Indian nation state is actually very often aligned against our civilizational interests. So that's a good question you're raising, and I gave you the answer. Aditya says, I've heard the black box, the flight recorder of the Boeing is being sent to the US. I'm sure they'll say it's the pilot's fault. The moment you give it away to the US, well, you've lost control of what happens. Why can't we decode the flight recorder and whatever, the cockpit voice recorder, the digital flight recorder? Why can't we decode it on our own? I'm sure Boeing is placing various firewalls and APIs and stuff in there, but we should have the ability to decode it on our own. If we send it to a foreign country, which essentially acts like an adversary, we will never get to the end of what happened. It's unfortunate. Sam says, Brazil, where does it stand on the geopolitical chessboard? Brazil is not geopolitically very important. It's a very big nation, resource-rich nation. But geopolitically, if you look at the hard power, not significant, unfortunately, for Brazil. Rashikuddin says, if the US gets involved in the Middle East war, what's the outcome? Well, if the US does get involved, they will want to effect a regime change. Then the likely outcome will be regime change in Tehran. Yeah. So how would they get involved? They would want to give Netanyahu a victory. A victory could be the smallest victory Netanyahu can get, which can be considered a victory, is the proper destruction of the Iranian nuclear program. That's the minimum victory that Netanyahu will seek. Otherwise, he has not won anything. It's been a waste of time. So if the US gets involved, one thing they could do is they could destroy the Iranian nuclear facility that's under the mountain. Okay. That's one thing they could do. Maybe that's enough for them. In that case, there is no regime change. But if they decide it's not enough, then they will want a regime change in Tehran. So these are the two outcomes I can think of. Either a complete destruction of Iran's nuclear program, or a step beyond is a regime change, which will be much, much, much more difficult to actually do. Okay, we are at the end, finally, of today's live stream. It's gone beyond the time limit that I had for myself. I thought it would be 1 hour, but anyway, happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for the questions, and I'm gonna end this live stream here right now. Tomorrow we have an 8 p.m. episode of the Indian Interest, in which we will discuss India-US relations. and then we'll do another live stream of Ask Abhijit. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next live stream. Keep asking questions, keep raising your standards, and keep learning. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.